I made Calvin angry, and no matter what I did, he wouldn't forgive me. Even when I said I was sick, he wasn't worried like he used to be. After I got off the train, I called him. Calvin, I'm in the city to see a heart specialist. Can you take me to the hospital? Calvin's voice was sharp. Your heart condition was cured years ago. Henry, stop playing the victim. A dull ache spread through my chest. It's just a checkup, I said quietly. He scoffed. Fine. Wait there. I found a corner in the station and waited, just like he told me to. I waited for a long, long time, until my heart slowly stopped beating. And Calvin still hadn't come. Before I closed my eyes, I never thought I'd die so suddenly, in a train station waiting room. At the time, I just felt so tired. I figured I'd just rest for a little while. Just a little while, and then I'd get to see Calvin. I pictured him standing in front of me, angrily demanding to know why I couldn't just stay home instead of running off to the city to cause trouble again. I slowly closed my eyes, making up good reasons to ask him to take me to the hospital, because he was the one who always took me to my appointments, because all my patient information was on his phone, because if the doctor asked about the heart surgery I had as a kid, Calvin would know the details better. Yes, that was it. It definitely wasn't because I missed him so much. Definitely not. But when I opened my eyes again, I saw my own body, sitting in the corner of the noisy, crowded waiting room. My head was tilted, leaning against the wall. My eyelashes were resting peacefully on my cheeks. I was perfectly still, as if I were still sleeping quietly. My phone suddenly buzzed, slipping from my hand and clattering to the floor. I reached for it without thinking, but my hand passed right through it. I looked at my translucent fingertips. Slowly, it dawned on me. I was already dead. I had died silently, in the middle of a crowded, noisy train station. I had died waiting for Calvin to come pick me up. The phone screen lit up, showing a message from Calvin, sent a minute ago. Still waiting? Guess that proves you're not sick at all. Henry, you're lying again. I'm not lying, I said without a sound. It's true, I don't feel good. I was born with a congenital heart defect. An operation when I was 6 supposedly cured it. But for the past 3 months, I'd started feeling that dull ache in my chest again, with occasional shortness of breath and my skin turning bluish. If this had happened before that incident, Calvin would have been so nervous and worried. He would have rushed me to the hospital immediately. But he didn't believe me anymore. He was convinced I was the kind of person who would do anything to get what I wanted. Because I'd been sickly since I was a child, Calvin started acting like a parent to me when he was just a teenager. He was mature, serious, and a stickler for the rules. He was afraid I'd get hurt, worried I'd catch a cold. He strictly controlled everything from how warmly I dressed to the temperature of the AC in my room. If I so much as coughed or frowned, Calvin would be on high alert. I loved Calvin's attention and care. He spoiled me rotten. I was always clinging to his side, saying childishly, I'm never getting married. Then I'd wrap my arms tightly around his waist, squeezing him as a warning, and you're not allowed to get married either, Calvin. You have to stay with me forever. Calvin would just smile and gently ruffle my hair. You're being ridiculous, he'd say without a trace of anger. Afraid of upsetting me, he'd quickly add, how about I'll wait to get married until after you do? Is that okay? I wouldn't say anything. I'd just tilt my head up and gaze at him for a long, long time. Part of me wished that moment would last forever. Another part wished something would change. Not long after, things did change. But not in the way I had imagined. I should have taken a longer look back then. I thought suddenly, looking at my own corpse. I didn't even get to see him one last time. People walked past me constantly, but no one gave me a second glance. After all, falling asleep in a waiting room is the most normal thing in the world. Just as I was thinking that, I saw a small hand pick up the phone from the floor. It was the little girl who had been sitting next to me earlier. When I was still conscious, we had chatted for a bit. We even gave each other nicknames. She called me Pretty Boy, and I called her Little Cutie. Little Cutie looked at the lit-up screen, seemingly trying to read the messages. But a 5-year-old doesn't know many words. She frowned, then stared at me with her big, serious eyes for a moment. Finally, she placed the phone back in my hand. As if she was afraid to wake me, she whispered, "Pretty boy, you dropped your phone. You should hold on to it." When I didn't answer, she ran back to her mother's arms. A few minutes later, the phone buzzed again a few times. The screen lit up. It was Calvin again. "I'm already at City General. If you want to come, take a cab yourself." He told me to wait, so why didn't he come? Could it be that he wasn't feeling well? As I thought this, my spirit shot upwards, and in an instant I was at City General Hospital. The first thing I saw was Calvin. He was wearing a dark gray, custom-tailored suit, his back to me, talking on the phone in front of a glass wall. He looked as handsome and composed as ever, like nothing could ever touch him.
I drifted over.
Thinking about scaring him, when I heard him say into the phone, "The doctor's checking on Ken now. Should be fine, don't worry." Ken? Why was he here? The next second, the door to the exam room opened. Calvin hung up and walked over. "Everything okay?" he asked the person who came out. "Calvin, the doctor said I'm fine," Ken said, grabbing his hand and frowning. "But I still don't feel right. Can you stay with me?" That drama queen, Ken. He's totally faking it. I gritted my teeth in frustration. I floated over to strangle him, but my hands passed straight through his body. Standing between them, I saw the faintest hint of a smile on Calvin's lips. "Okay," he said softly. Calvin was tall and lean. He had strong features and a cold glint in his eyes. When he wasn't talking, he had an imposing air about him. But whenever he smiled at me, I felt like he was the gentlest person in the entire world. But Calvin hadn't smiled at me in a very long time. But Calvin's gentle expression faded slightly. "Henry is coming over in a bit. I have to go with him for his heart checkup." A flash of resentment crossed Ken's eyes, before he quickly hid it. He smiled and said, "Calvin, you're the best, kindest person I've ever met. Henry isn't even your real brother, and after how he lied to you, you're still so good to him." This must have triggered a memory of me for Calvin. His face darkened. "This is the last time," he said. "If he comes looking for me and causing trouble again, I won't see him." I floated in the middle of the sterile white hallway. I could feel the cold wind from the window blowing right through me. How strange. Why does my heart still hurt? It really is the last time. I whispered, "Calvin, I won't bother you anymore, because I think I'm already dead." Ken was very pleased with Calvin's answer. He tugged on his arm, leading him away. Before they reached the exit, Calvin's phone rang. I drifted to his side and heard the voice on the other end. "Mr. Hayes, hello? Have you heard from Henry?" "Henry isn't my brother anymore." Recognizing the voice, Calvin frowned and said impatiently, "I hope you'll stop using him as an excuse to contact our family." The caller was my biological mother. Maybe it was because she was gravely ill, or maybe it was guilt that made her feel she couldn't face them. She was silent for a moment before choking out weakly, "It was my fault. I shouldn't have been so foolish as to switch Henry and Ken back then. But Henry is innocent. Could you please treat him like you used to?" It was as cliché as a soap opera. I was the family's fake son. The day after I was born, I was diagnosed with a severe congenital heart defect. My birth mother, afraid I wouldn't survive, secretly swapped me with the Hayes family's newborn son. It wasn't until she was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer a while back that she told the Hayes family the truth. She dragged Ken to the gate of our family's mansion, sobbing and banging her head on the ground. "I was wrong. I'm paying for it now. I'm dying. I'm giving Ken back to you now. I'm begging you. Please let me see Henry, he's my real son." But when I saw her, she said to me, "The Hayes family cured your illness, so you didn't lose out. You enjoyed 20 years of their good fortune. Now it's Ken's turn." I couldn't say I was sad. After all, she was right. On Ken's second night in the Hayes home, he came to my room, pretending to make peace. He said he would beg Mom and Dad to let me stay. Like an idiot, I blushed and said, "I want to stay too, but I don't want to be Calvin's brother anymore." So I confessed to Calvin. I told him I was both sad and relieved. I told him I'd realized long ago that what I felt for him was anything but brotherly love. I told him I wanted to be with him forever. I was nervous and hopeful, watching Calvin's eyes without blinking. But all I saw on his face was coldness and disappointment. "Ha," Calvin sneered. "Be with me forever?" He said coldly. "You mean you want to stay in this family forever and live a life of luxury?" He pulled a small recorder out of his pocket. My own voice came out of it from my conversation with Ken the day before. But the words were all wrong. It was like someone else was speaking with my voice. "I have a way to stay. As long as I'm with Calvin, the family will never kick me out. I was always so close to him on purpose. Now it's finally time to use him." The sound of an ambulance siren outside the door interrupted my memory. An ER doctor rushed past me, accidentally bumping into Calvin. "A patient went into sudden cardiac arrest. We need to get to them." "Sorry for bumping you," he said, turning back to apologize. Calvin froze for a second, then shook his head slightly to show it was okay. Then he spoke into the phone again. "You're saying I should just watch Henry pretend to be innocent and pitiful and let him use me again just like before?" Calvin scoffed, his voice filled with contempt. "I guess being despicable is genetic. Otherwise, how could he even think of confessing to his own brother?" Suddenly, a nurse's voice came from the other end of the line. "Bed 3, if you don't pay your hospital bill, we're going to have to stop your medication." Calvin heard this and said with certainty, "Henry didn't come here for a checkup. He came to get money for you, didn't he?" Before the other side could answer, Calvin hung up. He quickly opened his messages and typed, "Henry, don't bother coming. I'm not giving you a single penny. I didn't come for money. I'll never ask you for money again." Even though I knew Calvin couldn't see me, I still took a step back. I wanted to be farther away from him, because I could feel it. He really, truly disliked me. That's why he thought of me as such a terrible person. "He's not coming. Let's go." Calvin didn't get a reply from me. He stormed out of the building. As he got into the car, an ambulance, siren wailing, screeched to a halt in front of the building. A gurney covered with a white sheet was wheeled inside. Calvin saw it in the rearview mirror, frowned and looked away. The Rolls-Royce began to move slowly, just about to exit the hospital gates. But the driver stopped the car again. Someone was tapping on the rear window. Calvin lowered it and saw the same ER doctor who had bumped into him earlier. "Can I help you?" he asked. "Excuse me, I think this might be yours?" The doctor held out a cufflink, matte platinum with a finely cut black onyx. It was the birthday present I gave Calvin last year. He recognized it immediately, took it and said, "Yes, it is. It must have caught on my coat when I bumped into you," the doctor said apologetically. "Fell right into my pocket." Calvin clenched the cufflink in his fist, nodded his thanks, and raised the window. The Rolls-Royce started moving again. During the drive, Ken tried to make conversation with Calvin. Calvin was mostly silent, offering only brief responses. The hand holding the cufflink never unclenched. I sat on the far side of the seat, watching Calvin's profile past a chattering Ken. I wondered if he was also thinking about his birthday last year. The cufflinks were from a famous independent designer. The price was ridiculous, but I wanted to buy them with my own money. For 6 months before his birthday, I painted day and night, selling every single piece just to save up enough. At the stroke of midnight, I snuck into Calvin's room like a secret agent. He was frowning at a financial report, but his face broke into a smile the moment he saw me. I stood in front of him and ordered bossily, "Be serious."
No smiling.
Then I told him to close his eyes. Calvin did as he was told, but the corners of his mouth were still turned up, like he couldn't force them down. The room was completely quiet. I looked at Calvin's handsome face and found myself mesmerized. A roaring filled my ears, and I couldn't tell if it was his heartbeat or mine. "Henry?" Maybe he was getting impatient. Calvin said my name. I quickly took out the velvet box. "You can open your eyes now," I said in a fluster. Calvin opened it and was clearly surprised and delighted. Help me put them on, he said with a smile. I took out one of the cufflinks and noticed my fingertips were trembling slightly. I shoved everything into Calvin's hands, mumbled, "Happy birthday," and ran out of his room. Back in my bed, my mind kept replaying the scene, frame by frame. 1 second I was worried I hadn't hidden my feelings well enough. The next I was berating myself for not being more mature and composed. Soon, there was a knock on my door. Calvin came in, pulled me out from under the covers and said fondly, "What are you running for?" I looked up at him, wanting to say, "You have no idea," but I didn't. Calvin handed me a large gift box. I opened it and saw a custom set of paints I'd wanted for a long time, and an antique paintbrush. Either one cost far more than the cufflinks. Outside the window was a spring night in the city. The evening breeze carried in the scent of magnolia blossoms. The fragrance was rich and intense, and it felt like it was smothering me. "Do you like it?" Calvin, in a playful mood, messed up my hair and asked with a grin. His eyelashes cast long shadows, and the look in his eyes was so pure, so unguarded. "I love it." I didn't dare say it loudly. I could only whisper my reply. The Rolls-Royce drove into the Hayes estate, down the long, tree-lined driveway, and stopped at the front door. Mom came out to meet them. "How is he? Is Ken okay?" she asked, concerned. Calvin said he was fine. Ken pulled the same act again. He hugged Mom and said he still felt awful. Mom comforted him with a few awkward words and told him to go rest in his room. Noticing Mom still looked pale, Calvin asked, "Mom, are you not feeling well?" Mom placed a hand on her chest. "Ken is fine," she said with a frown. "But why do I feel so anxious, so unsettled? Do you think something might have happened to Henry? The place he's living now might be cold, and that's not good for his heart. Can you go get him and bring him home, please?" Calvin managed a small smile. "What could happen to him?" he said reassuringly. "He's always been so dramatic. The slightest ache or pain and he acts like the world is ending, wanting all of us to dote on him. Besides, his heart condition was cured a long time ago." Mom just shook her head, still worried. "You were with Henry when he was discharged after the surgery, so you didn't hear what the doctor said." "The doctor told me that a successful childhood surgery doesn't guarantee there won't be problems later in life. A lot of children with congenital heart defects need valve replacements as adults." Mom kept talking, not noticing the way Calvin's expression had frozen solid. "Henry was always a smart kid. When he felt fine, he'd act mischievous to make us laugh and put our minds at ease. But when he was really sick, he'd become so quiet and well-behaved. I don't know if you remember, but one time Henry fainted at school. I was terrified. I rushed to the hospital and asked him why he went to school if he wasn't feeling well. Do you know what he said?" Tears welled in Mom's eyes as she looked at Calvin. "That child said he knew his illness was serious, that he could very well die. And if he was going to die, he hoped it would be somewhere far away, not at home. That way we wouldn't be sad, and we wouldn't be scared to come home." Mom's voice broke with a sob. "Such a silly child," she whispered, talking about himself like some unwanted puppy. I floated in the air, wishing I could hug my mom, wishing I could wipe away her tears. But I couldn't do that anymore. I really did die far away from home. Really, just like an unwanted puppy. Even though Ken was a terrible person, I couldn't help but envy him. He had such wonderful biological parents, and such a wonderful brother. Even his adoptive mother had his best interests at heart. She was willing to risk prison, to secure his future before she died. Calvin was silent for a long time, the muscle in his clenched jaw twitching. He already took the train to the city, he said, his face grim. He probably came to ask me for money. Mom was shocked. How could that be? Henry didn't take any of the credit cards we gave him or the luxury goods we bought him when he left. Why would he come back to you for money? A flicker of uncertainty crossed Calvin's eyes, but his voice was still cold. His biological mother's hospital bills are due. They're about to cut off her medication. Mom, that's because she's transferring to another hospital, so they didn't renew the payment. Out of consideration for her raising Ken, We prepaid a large sum for her medical expenses at a better hospital. The color drained from Calvin's face. Is that true? He asked. It's true. Mom smiled. Quick, call Henry. Ask him where he is. Tell him Mom and Dad are waiting for him at home. I looked at my mother's face and felt both blessed and cursed. My mom was so good to me. If only I hadn't died. Calvin took out his phone and finally dialed my number. Listening to the monotonous ringing, I thought numbly, no one's ever going to answer that again. But the next second, the call was picked up. The other end of the line was noisy, but no one spoke. Calvin's voice was harsh. Henry, why didn't you answer my texts? A small gasp came from the other end, as if he'd startled someone. 2 seconds later, a child's voice said, Are you the person pretty boy was waiting for? Calvin paused, then softened his tone. Who is this? I'm little cutie. Calvin seemed taken aback. Could you please, he said slowly and seriously, let the owner of the phone speak? Little cutie sounded hesitant. In a tiny voice, she whispered, But pretty boy is asleep. He seems really tired, he's been sleeping for a long time. My mommy says good kids don't wake people up when they're sleeping. A reluctant smile touched Calvin's lips. All right, he said quietly. When he wakes up, tell him to stay right where he is. I'm coming to get him. Who are you? Little cutie asked. Are you the person he was waiting for? Yes, Calvin said. That's not right, little cutie said, confused. Pretty boy said he was waiting for his brother. He said his brother was really gentle and nice to him, the best brother in the world. She added in a low voice, but you were really mean just now. Not at all like the brother he described. Calvin was stunned for a moment. Then he said, I'm sorry. After he hung up, Mom scolded him gently. How could you let Henry wait so long? He fell asleep. Calvin's face immediately turned serious again. He needed to be taught a lesson, otherwise he'll just keep lying. Mom looked at him with concern. Henry has been the apple of your eye since he was little. Why are you so strict with him now? Is it just because he's not your real brother? Calvin didn't speak, just shook his head. You're a deep thinker, Mom continued, and you rarely let things get to you. The only people who can make you angry are the ones you care about. But Henry is very sensitive. Don't hurt his feelings. Hurt? A little, I guess. When Calvin said I was faking it, lying, that I was only there for money, my heart had ached, briefly but sharply. Mom didn't know I had confessed my feelings to Calvin, so she didn't know the real reason he was so angry. How could it be because he cared? How could a person be so cruel to someone they cared about? I could never figure it out. When Calvin left the house, it had started to snow heavily. The traffic was terrible, the Rolls-Royce crept along in fits and starts. Calvin lowered the window twice to look, but he managed not to rush the driver. I sat in the seat next to him, but not close to him, like I used to when he picked me up to take me home. As we neared the train station, Calvin took out his phone to send a text. Can you make it to the exit on your own? He quickly sent another, never mind. Stay put in the waiting room. Don't move. By the time he parked the car, Calvin still hadn't gotten a reply. He got out of the car with a cold expression, muttering angrily as he walked toward the waiting room. Henry, you've gotten quite a temper, haven't you? Just wait until I get my hands on. He stopped mid-sentence. Calvin's gaze was fixed. I followed his eyes and saw myself. The waiting room was still packed. Travelers were constantly dragging their luggage back and forth. Tall and striking, Calvin stood out in the crowd. Snow dusted his shoulders. He stared at me coldly. I was still in the same position as before, leaning against the wall, eyes closed. I looked like the quietest person in the entire waiting room. Suddenly, Calvin didn't seem to be in a hurry anymore. He walked slowly, without making a sound, as if he didn't want to wake me. Calvin stood in front of me, looking down at me for a moment. Then he tapped my forehead with his finger. Henry, you've made your point, he said flatly. You can stop pretending to be asleep. When I didn't move, Calvin let out an exasperated laugh. He pinched the flesh of my cheek, just like he used to when he was punishing me. If you don't get up, I'm leaving. Don't regret it. You'll just end up crying later. With that, he gave my shoulder a hard shove. My body lost its balance and pitched forward. Limp, I fell into Calvin's arms. Henry. He caught me, his patience gone. Get up. Stop messing around. Perhaps it was the unnatural weight and temperature of my body, but Calvin finally took a serious look at my face. His fingertips trembled as he gently touched my pale violet lips. Then he took my hand and saw that my nail beds were also tinged with purple. Henry? Calvin said my name again, but the anger was gone from his voice. Little cutie hopped off her chair. What's wrong with pretty boy? Is he refusing to wake up? She asked. Calvin swept me up into his arms. He's sick, he said grimly, striding towards the exit. The heat in the Rolls-Royce was blasting, but my body was still cold. No matter what Calvin did, he couldn't warm me up. He called the hospital, telling them the patient was unconscious, with severe oxygen deprivation and cyanosis. He told them to have a doctor ready at the entrance. The driver was already going as fast as he could, but Calvin kept urging him to go faster. He stared at my face, his breathing becoming ragged and uneven. The Rolls-Royce sped through the blizzard and heavy traffic. With every sudden stop, my body would lurch. Calvin held me tighter, whispering over and over, "It's okay. It's okay. Don't be scared. We're almost at the hospital." My cold forehead rested against Calvin's neck. I had lost all feeling, so I couldn't feel his warmth. There's no use, Calvin. There's no hope. I turned my head and watched the snowflakes splatter against the car window, shattering into pieces. Suddenly, I remembered seeing the same thing from an airplane window. It was the time Calvin was on a business trip abroad and was going to miss New Year's Eve at home. I got permission from my professor and secretly took a red-eye flight to go find him. Just before landing, we hit a massive snowstorm. The plane lost contact for a short time, circling in the sky for nearly half an hour. After we landed safely, Calvin caught me in the arrivals hall. His hair was a mess, and he was glaring at me furiously. "Henry, who gave you permission to come here without saying a word?" Calvin's eyes were bloodshot. He grabbed my wrist, his voice angrier than I had ever heard it. "Why can't you just stay home? What if the plane had crashed? What if you had died?" I tilted my head up slightly, and the snowflakes on my eyelashes melted and trickled into my eyes. "I didn't want you to be alone on New Year's Eve." I looked at Calvin and whispered, "I'm sorry." Calvin stared at me for a few seconds, and then he stopped yelling. Just like everyone else in the arrivals hall, he pulled the person he had been waiting for, sick with worry, into his arms. Calvin held me so tightly, I couldn't tell if he had forgiven me or not, but I loved it when he held me that tight. Even if it hurt, I wanted him to hold me even longer. It didn't matter if he hadn't forgiven me. There's no mistaking the feeling of being loved and cherished. I think Calvin really did give me hope once, and that hope made me overconfident. The lesson was a painful one. The Rolls-Royce arrived at the hospital quickly. Medical staff were waiting at the entrance and wheeled me directly into the emergency room. Calvin stood in the middle of the hallway, clutching my backpack, looking lost. He heard a ringing sound. He spun around in a daze, before pulling my phone out of the backpack. "Mr. Henry Hayes, I'm glad I finally reached you. After a professional analysis, we can confirm that the recording on your device was, in fact, synthesized by an AI using a sample of your voice. If you need it, we can provide a certificate of authenticity and even trace the creator's IP address." "What recording?" Calvin cut him off. "Who is this?" he asked, his voice slow. The person on the other end explained, "We're a professional AI detection agency. A few weeks ago, a Mr. Henry Hayes came to us with a voice recorder. He said that although it was his voice on the recording, he had never said those words, and he asked us to help him verify it." Calvin was clearly stunned. "A voice recorder?" he murmured. Calvin hadn't wanted to give me the recorder at first, trying to destroy the evidence. He had looked down at me, his voice stern. "It's useless. I won't be fooled by you again." I shook my head, trying to explain that I had never said those things. that I did want to stay, but I never intended to deceive him, that my feelings for him were real. But Calvin didn't believe me anymore. He threw the recorder on the floor, refusing to listen to another word. Then take it and listen to it a few more times. I listened to it over and over, but I couldn't find any proof it was fake. I had no choice but to take it to a professional. If only I had found out sooner. Then I could have confronted Ken with the proof and demanded that Calvin apologize to me. But it was too late. None of it mattered anymore. Sir? The voice on the phone broke the silence. Could you please pass the results on to Mr. Henry Hayes? It seemed to click for Calvin all at once. Okay, he said calmly. I'll tell him, and I'll apologize to him. The call ended, but Calvin kept the phone to his ear, talking to himself. Apologize to him. I have to apologize to Henry. I was wrong about him. The doors to the emergency room opened, and a doctor walked out. Like a switch had been flipped, Calvin rushed forward, his face full of hope. My brother's okay now, right? The doctor's expression was grim as he slowly shook his head. I'm sorry, Mr. Hayes. The patient was already deceased before he arrived. Calvin froze. He stood a few feet from the emergency room doors, his face stark white under the overhead lights. After a few seconds, he lunged at the doctor, grabbing him by the collar. You're lying. He was just unconscious from lack of oxygen. This has happened before. He gets some oxygen and the blueness goes away. Do you even know how to do your jobs? If you can't save him, then get out of my way. After yelling, Calvin tried to force his way into the emergency room. The doctor held him back, saying urgently that wasn't cyanosis. It was lividity starting to set in. Calvin didn't believe him. With a surge of strength, he broke free from the doctor's grasp and pushed open the doors to the ER. A gurney covered with a white sheet stood before him. He ripped the sheet off like a madman and saw a familiar face. Henry. He leaned down close to my ear, calling my name in a hoarse whisper. His voice was soft, hesitant. I was only an hour late, he rambled. You're just pretending not to wake up to punish me, aren't you? Calvin dropped to one knee, apologizing earnestly.
I'm sorry, Henry.
I promise I'll never be late again. Please forgive me, okay? I know about the recording, too. Ken must have done it. I'll make him apologize to you, and then I'll make him move out. Don't be mad at me anymore. Just get better and come home with me. Mom is waiting for you. A gust of wind blew in from the doorway. My eyelashes fluttered for a second, then were still. Calvin kept staring, as if desperately searching for any sign of life. The doctor came over and told Calvin he was sorry, offering his condolences. A few nurses gently replaced the white sheet. We're sorry, Mr. Hayes, one said softly. We need to take the body to the temporary holding room now. Calvin didn't move. After a tense moment, he finally requested in a low voice, "Can you let me be alone with him for a little while?" The doctor and nurses, worried about Calvin's mental state, didn't dare to force the issue. They told him he could have 15 minutes. Calvin reached out and gently touched my cheek. Then he smoothed the hair that had fallen across my forehead. We only have 15 minutes, he said. We could have had so much more time, couldn't we? I thought Calvin was just regretting being late. But then he said, do you remember? Last year, when you were sick in the hospital, I stayed with you. I fell asleep in the chair next to your bed. You woke up in the middle of the night, snuck out of bed, and came over to me. Calvin smiled, a light shining in his eyes. I actually woke up the second you moved, but I kept my eyes closed. I wanted to see what you were going to do. He stopped, his throat working. If only I hadn't opened my eyes then, he choked out. I remember, if Calvin hadn't opened his eyes that night, I would have kissed him. I remember that night perfectly. When I woke up, I just wanted to tell Calvin to sleep on the cot. I sat up in bed and whispered, Calvin. But he was sleeping soundly in the chair, his head propped on his hand. His usually mature and serious face looked soft and defenseless. A bunch of mischievous ideas popped into my head. I tried calling him things I'd never dare to otherwise. Mr. Hayes? Hey, rich boy? Mr. CEO? Finally, I dared to say his name, Calvin. I was very close, but Calvin still didn't wake up. The light in the hospital room was too dim. I suddenly wanted to see his face more clearly. That was the only reason, really. It wasn't that I was trying to kiss him. The moment my breath almost touched his skin, he suddenly opened his eyes. Damn it. I was so close. But thank God, I was only close. We stared at each other. Calvin seemed groggy and didn't say anything for a moment. I straightened up, terrified he would hear my heart pounding. I scrambled back into bed and said loudly, You snore and grind your teeth and drool in your sleep. You should just go home. Calvin didn't go home that night, but it seemed like he never fell back asleep. So he was awake the whole time. Did he open his eyes? Because he knew what I was about to do? I floated in the air and whispered to Calvin, you would have been even angrier if I'd actually kissed you. Wouldn't you? If I had kissed him, would he have believed me when Ken set me up? Probably not. If I had kissed him, it wouldn't have given us any more time. Calvin couldn't hear me, just like I had that night. He leaned in carefully, stopping just inches from my lips. He looked at my face intently, as if he was waiting for me to open my eyes. But even when a tear fell onto my cheek, I didn't wake up. Calvin slowly closed his eyes and gently touched his lips to mine. If only I hadn't opened my eyes, he repeated brokenly. If I had known, I wouldn't have opened my eyes. Known what? That I was going to die? Or that I wasn't your brother? 15 minutes is a short time, but memories can make it feel long. A nurse knocked and came in, standing silently to the side, a quiet reminder that time was up. Calvin still held my hand tightly. I should have gone to the station to get you sooner, he said in agony, as if he truly regretted it, a regret he could never get over. Henry? Mom suddenly appeared in the doorway. Her face was ashen. Her eyes were wide, as she walked slowly into the room. What's going on? Mom's voice began to tremble. She threw herself onto my body, sobbing. Henry, what happened to you? Wake up and look at Mommy. She got up and grabbed Calvin's shirt, shaking him. Say something. What happened? Calvin's expression was numb. Mom, he said suddenly, I love Henry. I want to be with him forever. Mom's face was streaked with tears. What? She asked, bewildered. Henry and I aren't related by blood, Calvin said seriously. I'm going to marry him. Mom looked like she was about to collapse. Calvin, have you lost your mind? She shrieked. Calvin ignored her. And I'm sending Ken abroad. He can never come home. Calvin told her everything, holding nothing back. No wonder you were so insistent that Henry leave and go back to his birth mother. Mom sat on a bench in the hospital corridor, speaking to Calvin, who was kneeling before her. But why are you suddenly accepting him now? Calvin didn't answer. He just asked, Mom, will you let us be together? Mom had lost all her usual gentle grace. She glared at Calvin, her teeth clenched. Calvin, are you done being insane? Henry is gone. You can never be together. Seeing the vacant look on Calvin's face, Mom started crying again. What's the point of all this now? How could you have been so cruel back then? Henry was always such a good kid. He trusted you so much. He was so attached to you. How could you not believe him? Why did you wait so long to go get him? Maybe my Henry could have survived. Even I thought it was cruel. Blaming Calvin at a time like this would only make him feel more guilty, wouldn't it? We were family once, after all. We were together for so many years. It was normal for him to feel guilty, that I was dead. But I figured his guilt wouldn't last too long. His real brother wasn't dead. Calvin hadn't really lost anything. He would be back to his old self soon, back to being the perfect Calvin. I sat next to Mom, wrapping my arms around her shoulders in a phantom hug, trying to comfort her. Mom, I already lived a lot longer than I was supposed to. If it weren't for you, I probably would have died from my heart condition when I was very little. I was so happy that I got to be your son, even for a short time. So please don't be sad anymore. After a moment, Mom really did stop crying. She opened my backpack and took out my things one by one. Besides a charger and some toiletries, there were a few folded-up medical reports. Mom unfolded them and saw that they were from just a week ago. The county hospital could only do an echocardiogram. The results weren't good. The doctor had recommended further tests. Tears fell onto the paper. You weren't feeling well for so long. Mom cried. Why didn't you say anything? He did, Calvin said, staring blankly at the floor. His voice was low. He told me. I thought he was just playing pitiful to get my attention, so I yelled at him. Mom shook her head and pulled a small sketchbook from my bag. She opened it and saw a small portrait of herself. The colors were simple, the lines delicate. She turned the page and there was one of Dad. I prayed she wouldn't keep flipping through it, but my prayer went unanswered. She saw the drawings I had made of Calvin. I had drawn so many of him, some of him working, some of him driving, some of him carefully squeezing paint onto my palette or holding my easel. Serious Calvin, gentle Calvin, doting Calvin. Later, my mind was always filled with images of a harsh, angry Calvin. But I didn't like that version of him, so I never drew it. When I missed him, but didn't dare to contact him, I would open my sketchbook. I would remember the times when I still mattered to Calvin. And I would tell myself optimistically, it's okay. To have been cherished once is more than enough. Mom and Calvin sat on the cold hospital bench for a long time. It wasn't until late at night that Mom left with Dad. Calvin seemed to have processed what had happened. He was very calm, methodically handling all the arrangements for me by himself. Calvin had always been rational, a firm believer in materialism. But suddenly he started consulting people, asking them strange, morbid questions, like, when you die, does your soul go home? Is it scary? Does cremation hurt? If you're reborn, will you still have a congenital heart defect? No one could give him a straight answer. After long silences, Calvin finally gave up on the idea of having my heart surgically repaired post-mortem. But then he started asking about people who supposedly had supernatural abilities, inquiring if there was a way to bring a soul back. He said he never got to say goodbye to the one he loved, that he had so much left to say. Calvin offered a lot of money, but no one dared to take it. They all questioned his sanity, worried that if they couldn't deliver, they'd face the wrath of the Hayes family. When Mom and Dad found out, they gave him a harsh scolding. After that, Calvin went back to acting like a normal person. Before the funeral, Ken was sent to Greenland, where it is winter all year round. He was forbidden from ever returning to the country. My biological mother never saw Ken one last time. She passed away from her illness shortly after. It was still snowing on the day of the funeral. Friends and family came and went, holding black umbrellas in silence. Only Calvin stayed behind, sitting in front of the snow-covered tombstone. He traced the outline of my black and white photo with his fingertips. He wasn't holding an umbrella. Snowflakes passed through my soul and landed on his hair and shoulders. Henry, you can hear me, can't you? Calvin's voice was very soft, as if he were lost in memory. The truth is, after you became an adult, I was afraid to be too close to you. The way you looked at me, the tone of your voice, the feel of your cool, soft hand, it was all like a drug, an addiction that kept me from thinking straight. But then you went to college and wanted to live in the dorms, and that made me so angry. Mom and Dad both agreed, but I was the only one who was firmly against it. My excuse at the time was that I was worried you couldn't take care of yourself. But that was only part of the reason. The truth is, I was scared you'd start dating someone at school, that you'd get close to someone else. Calvin paused, a humorless smile on his face. So when I heard that recording, he continued, it was like I'd found a lifeline. I thought it would free me from the feelings that had tormented me for years. I told myself, Henry is lying to me. He doesn't really love me. Falling in love with my own brother was just a delusion, a misunderstanding that no one would ever find out about. Coward, I muttered, taking advantage of the fact that he couldn't hear me. Calvin went on to say that he had given the company back to our father, and had used all his personal assets to establish a foundation for children with congenital heart defects. It would provide free help to many children like me, ensuring they got the surgery and follow-up care they needed. He said he wanted to sell his properties and take me to settle down in the place I always wanted to go. Calvin said many things, but he could never bring himself to say goodbye. The snow gradually stopped, but the sky remained gray. A single ray of sunlight broke through the clouds, like a road connecting heaven and earth. My soul suddenly felt lighter. I couldn't maintain my distance from Calvin anymore. I began to drift farther and farther away from him. "I'm going now." I smiled and waved at him. Calvin looked up in my direction, as if he had suddenly heard something. He didn't say anything else. He just slumped in front of my tombstone, slowly shrinking into a small, dark speck. "I don't want my heart to hurt anymore," I thought, "so let's not see each other again." Calvin,